Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Overcoming Chronic Illness podcast. My name is Dr. Brian Rade, and I'm a naturopathic doctor. And today I am interviewing Sara. Sara goes by the handle The Organic Dietitian on Instagram, and I've been following her for a while on there. And she just posts a lot of really interesting things. She talks about the cell danger response. She talks about the importance of trauma-informed therapy. She talks about various, of course, gastrointestinal related things, as you might imagine, with the dietitian. Obviously diet and things like that as well. And just quite a few really compelling posts. And so I reached out to her, and she agreed to be on my podcast. So I'm looking forward to having a chat with her, just picking her brain and seeing what kind of insights that she's found with working with folks over the years dealing with different health issues. I'll bring her into the conversation in just a moment. Just before jumping into the interview, just a reminder that I do offer I have a course for individuals out there. It's for the general public. It's called the Overcoming Chronic Illness course. The Overcoming Chronic Illness course. It's several modules that go over all of the kind of biggest topics in the complex chronic illness world, if you will. Things like chronic infections like Lyme and co-infections, mold illness, heavy metals, different digestive issues like SIBO and LIBO and yeast overgrowth, things like that, histamine-related issues, mitochondrial dysfunction. So it's essentially a comprehensive multi-part course that I developed to help folks essentially navigate the waters of complex chronic illness. I see patients from all over the world, and a lot of the times when folks come to see me, they say, Dr. Rade, I wanted to work with you because you talk about all of these different topics. I found a really great doctor who knows about mold, and I found a really great doctor who knows about SIBO, and I found a really great doctor who knows about Lyme, but they're all kind of like in their own camps, if you will. And I was looking for someone who, and I seem to have all of those issues, and I'm looking for someone who can kind of amalgamate all that together. I realized years ago I'm only one man. I can't see every patient with complex chronic illness in the world, and so I put this course together to essentially act as kind of again a navigation system to help folks to get a better understanding of what's going on with these different conditions, how they can all kind of interrelate. But then also as part of the course, folks get what I kind of refer to as these cheat sheets so they can bring to their local clinicians to say, hey, like, you're helping me with my SIBO, but I think I have a mold issue going on. Here's, some resources to, so you have a better sense of like how to test me, how to treat me, different things like that. So it's again, essentially a resource that I put together so that folks could access information, kind of have it all in one place. And that's an offering that I have. The course, I do offer the first two modules for free to folks, so to kind of try it before you buy it, so to speak. So if you register for my newsletter, then you'll get a welcome email, and in that is the links to the first two modules of the Overcoming Chronic Illness course. And if that's something that you're interested in pursuing further, then you can go on and purchase the whole shebang if you want to. So the link to that is in the show notes of the show if you're listening to this on a podcast platform, or if you're watching this on YouTube, then it is in the description of the video below. So without further ado, I will pause the recording, and I'll be joined again in just a moment by the organic dietitian. All right, everyone. Well, I'm now joined by Sara, the organic dietitian. Sara, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to chatting with you about a lot of different topics. But just before we jump into the meat and potatoes of things here, would you mind just giving folks a little background on who you are and how you got involved in the organic dietitianing world?
Yeah, I'm Sara Korzeniewski. I'm a dietitian, registered dietitian by trade. That's kind of how things first got started for me, but quickly kind of realized that wasn't my true passion and really discovered more of real food, I guess was the first step, which then transitioned into more holistic health. And it was interesting though, because I think a lot of people get into this industry, because they're dealing with a health issue and they're looking to get well. Well, I was kind of the opposite. I got into this industry first, and then I realized I maybe wasn't as healthy as I thought I was. And so, tried to seek out some healing from functional practitioners and wasn't really getting as far as I thought I should be getting. So I ended up kind of taking matters into my own hands and became really passionate about learning everything I could about functional medicine and holistic health, and started in more of the standard what I call the standard functional medicine space, which was learning about a lot of functional labs, learning a lot of kind of quote unquote protocols, which, you know, seemingly was working well initially, but then, pandemic hit and I really started to change my philosophies on, the healing journey and started to dive much more into, transformational coaching, trauma, the emotional side, psychological side of things, and really realized that it really truly does take an entire mind, body, spirit approach, and that psychology and physiology work together. They're bidirectional, and we can't heal one without the other. So now I've kind of switched things a little bit again, and that's now more what I do in my practice with my clients. But now I also work with my mentor, who turned into my business partner, and we create programs for other practitioners to learn kind of this same approach that I'm talking about.
Cool. Well, now I have like about 10 more questions than the ones I had pre-generated, but maybe I'll just start at the top and we'll go from
Sure.
there, Sarah. And just since it's on the top of my mind right now, before I forget to mention it, just for folks listening, we're not giving any medical advice during this podcast episode. This is all for informational purposes only. If you need any healthcare advice or medical advice, please talk to your healthcare provider to get that advice. So I guess just one quick question here, because I mean I've interviewed other folks and talked to other colleagues, and just based on my own experience too about sort of like some of the limitations, shall we say, like a functional lab testing. I think there's some tests that are really really valuable and some that are used a lot but maybe have questionable value or maybe questionable validity. Would you mind just speaking a little bit to maybe I don't know, well, maybe just some functional lab tests that you feel are valuable and some that you find have not really stood the test of time for you?
Yeah, for sure. So honestly, I feel the one that I run with all clients out of the gate, and this is actually one of the courses that my partner and I, Jen, created, is the Holistic HTMA Pro program. And so we teach practitioners how to utilize, implement, interpret the hair tissue mineral analysis test through the lens of trauma, psychoneuroimmunology, and transformational coaching. And so I think there's a lot of talk in the functional medicine space about finding the root causes, root causes, root causes, right? And that is absolutely important for sure. But I also think that there is a little bit of misunderstanding about what root causes truly are. And again, when we're talking about real transformation and real healing, it needs to be both physical and psychological. And HTMA, which is the hair tissue mineral, is really the only test that I know of that, when interpreted and implemented properly, it actually provides a window into the physical body and the mental and emotional body. And no other test that I know of can do that. Most other labs are really just looking at physical things, right? And honestly, I used to run like stool tests. I used to run a lot of hormone testing. I used to run, food sensitivity testing, organic acids testing, things like that. And, I try not to work in a very dogmatic manner, meaning, oh, those are never good. But I do tend to think that they are really more looking for symptoms. They're symptoms of deeper factors. And like stool testing, people don't really understand. And this is something I didn't know, initially, because it's not what I was taught, was that really like stool testing isn't testing really your gut microbiome, it's your stool microbiome. And it's like largely the microbiome in the large intestine. So it's like there's a lot of limitations. I think a lot of issue people run into is when they try to look at a test as like the holy grail. Like, oh, a stool test is going to tell exactly what's going on in my gut and exactly what bugs and things like that. And I also tend to find that a lot of people are running these labs only to then recommend a crap ton of supplements to try to fix what the lab is showing, right? And again, there's really nothing holistic about that, because that's how is that different than doctors running labs and prescribing medications based on the labs? So we're trying to like chase the symptoms and chase correcting the lab without really taking other factors and things into account. And a lot of other tests, I think I even read that one of the stool tests that's very popular, they just increased their prices. And like they were already kind of, pretty expensive for most people. And now they're getting more and more expensive. And so the nice thing about the hair tissue is that, like, here in the US anyway, if you just ordered the test itself, it's like 65 bucks and it's just a hair sample. And you can get so much more information if you know what you're looking for. Because again, the problem that a lot of people that are using things like even hair tissue is, which is, looking at minerals and things, is that they think prescribing minerals is what's going to fix it. But HTMA, again, is really more telling us and showing us the wear and tear that life has had on somebody. So it's like this whole supplemental approach of like we have to supplement everything, again, is really outdated. So if we are really skilled and kind of know what we're looking for and understand the whole mind, body, spirit approach truly, and we can then utilize things like hair tissue to help as act as like a blueprint or a roadmap to work with clients. Because I think the other part that people tend to get wrong or not as effective, I'll say, is that they're just like, as a practitioner, I'm telling you what to do. Like I'm giving you not just a supplemental protocol, but I'm telling you what foods to eat and not eat, what lifestyle habits to implement. And like, humans are wired for self-efficacy. So they need to be in their driver's seat. They need to play a huge role in their health. They need to take 100% responsibility versus us as practitioners stepping into the role of, here, I'm going to tell you what to do to fix you. So that's like the other piece that tends to not be as helpful even when it comes to utilizing things like lab testing.
Those are a lot of really great observations, Sarah, and yeah, something that I think there's a lot of wisdom embedded in there. And I couldn't agree with you more that I think a lot of stock is kind of is put into lab testing, and I think that's maybe partially the fault of the companies that offer these tests. They're kind of advertised in such a way where it's like this is the holy grail, and then clinicians don't always know to question that, and then the patient might get the false impression that like yes, this stool test is going to tell us about your entire gut microbiome, when it's like probably only telling us, as you said, the large intestine, and really realistically, like where's that stool hanging out? It's really the distal, one half to one third of the large intestine. So what about the ascending colon, the rest of the transverse colon? Like there's so much intestine missing, right? So couldn't agree with you more there. And I really appreciate what you said about sort of like paraphrasing here, but kind of empowering our patients to be like, kind of equal partners, if you will, or not even equal partners. Like we're like just like almost the silent partner who sometimes talks a lot. In my case, anyways, I'm yapping all the time with my patients, but like really they're like, the main shareholder, we're just there to like kind of be the consultant for them to help them along the way. So yeah, really, really appreciate what you said there. I would like to ask you some follow-up questions about the hair tissue mineral analysis because that's very compelling. Most folks don't talk about a any type of physical lab specimen as being able to give us a whole lot of insight into what's happening on a mental emotional level. So if you wouldn't mind, like maybe just giving us maybe a bit of a tangible example of like what might you see on an HTMA that would tell you about someone's mental emotional well-being, please.
Yeah, sure. So to kind of start from the very, very beginning is like minerals, as commonly said, are the spark plugs of the body, particularly of cellular function. So minerals are like gas for your car, physically speaking, right? Like, and we can't get minerals, we can't make them. We have to get them from, outside sources. So foods, possibly supplements, things like that. And, our health begins on a cellular level, but then so does, disease and illness, right? And so that's why those types of imbalances are happening very quietly beneath the surface, sometimes for an entire lifetime, many, many years, before symptoms pop up. And so it's the minerals within the cells that keep our engines running. And everything in our body is made up of cells, right? Our endocrine system, our digestive system, our, detox, immune, everything, right? So like the health of our cells is critical. Okay. But the body also utilizes minerals when we are dealing with stress. And stress is, as you know, a very loose term because hundreds of things can be stressors, right? It's not just like being busy or like, things like that, right? Our nutrition, if it's not compatible, is a stressor. Blood sugar, about like relationships, environments, like everything, right? So, the more our stress buckets get full from whatever stressors, the more taxing that is on the system. And we have to remember that our bodies are doing everything it can to keep things in balance. And so part of what it's going to do is use your fuel to help keep things, in check to the best it can. So therefore it's using minerals. So we burn through minerals much more quickly when we are under stress. And so then the more stress we're dealing with, the more nutrients are going to get depleted. Even if it's a, psychological stressor, not always just a physical stressor. And, at the same time, when the body is dealing with stress and it's trying to keep things in a homeostatic state, it might kind of rob Peter to pay Paul in an instance. So it's like it's it's taking a toxin, for example, something that we don't want, like a mercury or cadmium or whatever, and it's kind of using it to falsely stimulate cellular energy. Because again, it's like what's the worst of two evils. So that's kind of the essential basics when we talk about minerals. And so therefore, we can say that minerals aren't just a reflection, again, of physical stressors because they are, but they can be a reflection of metaphysical stressors as well. So, again, the body is very smart. It's doing everything it possibly can to keep things in check. So, to give you one example, calcium. Okay, calcium is a very hard mineral. It is an essential mineral, and because most of it's going to be in your bone, right? And if you ever see like calcium build up on a faucet, it's very white, hard, you know, stiff, crystally. And so when the body is dealing with a lot of trauma, a lot of emotions that maybe are not comfortable to feel, okay, then it actually can kind of purposely start holding on to calcium and building up calcium and building it up around your cells to literally help kind of body armor you in a sense to protect you from feeling those emotions. And so if we see really high levels of calcium on an HTMA, that's possibly one connection we can make. And therefore, we can start having conversations with clients, trying to bring some awareness into, yeah, is there, some place in your life where you feel like you're maybe feeling emotionally numb, or you feel like you have to protect yourself from something, or, you're kind of armoring yourself from something. And I can tell you from experience of running, hundreds of these tests and also obviously teaching practitioners about this now too, that they're always like, oh my gosh, yes. Like, yeah, like, and then they'll start opening up about those types of factors, going on in their lives and things that a lot of times other practitioners aren't even talking to them about, or they just haven't even thought about it because maybe it was something that happened more in the past. And so they thought they were kind of, over it. And so it really helps to, again, make them a huge part of their healing process and really being able to look at all the different areas of healing, not just the physical.
Um, would you be able to give us another example, like the elevated calcium? Like you explained that really eloquently. What if there is, I don't know, there are certain nutrients, certain minerals, if they're low, that indicate something on more of a mental emotional level, or another high one?
Yes. I mean, yeah, really any mineral, if it's high, it can kind of point to something. If it's low, it can kind of point to something. Like magnesium is another one. I mean, really all minerals can be utilized, during stress, but magnesium is another one. So it can actually be really high as well when someone is dealing with a lot of stressors, or it can be low. Sodium and potassium are also pretty common ones that are seen as low. And so again, it might be, things like where are you, struggling to open up, or where do you feel there are certain patterns that you can say, hey, this looks like you're digging your heels in somewhere, or you feel like there's a change that you need to make, but maybe you feel resistant to actually making that change. Or where in your life do you feel like you're, up against a wall somewhere? Because there could be like a mineral that literally looks like a wall because it's high, but yet all the other ones are kind of low. So it's the minerals, individual minerals themselves, but it's also about mineral ratios. So there's certain patterns that we can see in the ratios that can kind of point to asking more about some of those, mental, emotional, or metaphysical aspects, depending on the patterns that you're seeing.
So if I'm understanding, so patient comes in or client comes in, their, HTMA shows high calcium. You ask them about, are they like maybe armoring themselves against something or whatnot? And then, they say, yes, like that does seem to be something that's going on. So I think as you were insinuating earlier, the solution isn't like, okay, let's put you or send you off for like chelation therapy to get rid of all that calcium. It's more like, okay, this is coming from more of a mental emotional level. There's that stress coming from that maybe element of things. So what would if I'm getting it correct up to that point, give or take, what would the next step be in that case? Like, would you be doing counseling work with them directly? Would you be referring them to for some type of therapy? Like, what would the next step be if they in a scenario
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on the client. And of course, I'm not saying supplements are never helpful.
Sure.
I definitely think that there is a time and a place. And, I'm more of a less is more approach when it comes to supplements. And I think the thing with cellular health and cellular energy is that we do need energy to heal, and when we don't have that cellular voltage, like people can even struggle to take action,
Mm,
right? Or like healing trauma and feeling emotions takes energy, right? So like there can be some supplemental support, based on what you see as just kind of an initial thing, right? And that's what it is, it's support. And, not to mention the fact that minerals are much more deficient in our foods because of, soil and things like that. So I tend to find where people make a mistake is that they're, putting them on, 10, 20, supplements based on HTMA. Like it's a less is more. So want to make that part clear. So yeah, like certain things can help support calcium, help break it up, help try to, push it back where we want it to go versus staying in the soft tissues, those types of things. But again, using them minimally. And, we always recommend obviously foundational support. And I'm sure you can agree to this that most people aren't really focusing on foundational stuff. Like there's a lot of room for improvement, optimizing their nutrition, which is going to look different for everybody, right? And obviously, the health of one's gut is going to largely, kind of guide what that might look like. Getting out into sunlight, mindset, getting enough sleep, getting enough rest, which is different than sleep. Those things. Those are always going to be important. But yes, when it comes to dealing with kind of the mental and emotional side of things, that's kind of where transformational coaching comes into play. And it's really about asking clients strategic questions and, really kind of helping them bring more awareness to what things they're experiencing, how it's showing up in their lives, and then working with them to create action steps for them to start working on that. So, in that instance, it might be, we have a lot of tools in our toolbox as practitioners, right? There's hundreds of different tools for just about everything. So, it might be an instance of, yeah, I might have a feeling of maybe a couple of things that they might enjoy, but I'm going to present them with those options and say, hey, how do these sound to you? Or where do you want to start with this? Or do you have ideas on how you might start working through, whatever it is they might be experiencing? And, help them. This is about, again, them creating their own self-efficacy and taking responsibility, for their own healing. Because someone is going to be much more inclined to do something that was their idea than if someone else told them they needed to do it, right? And so, yeah, this is where, as a transformational coach, really understanding how to help clients work through emotions, how they identify with themselves, the values that they have, the beliefs that they have, because it's a lot of times these underlying things that are, playing a role, in the actions that they're taking and, the relationships that they're attracting into their lives, the things that they're accepting, the habits that they have that maybe aren't serving them all that well. And so it's the transformational coaching of just asking them questions. And what I kind of like to say is like, I am a client's thinking partner. So
Mm,
I am not necessarily here to tell them, okay, here's the two things that you need to do to work on your emotions. Like, oftentimes people just want to be seen and heard too. They want a space where they feel safe, which is an important part of healing trauma, like safety to talk through things, work through things, come to their own conclusions. What is it that they feel that they need right now? What helps, if I were to say what makes you feel safe, you know, tell me.
mm,
What things do you feel are happening in your life or situations that help you feel safe? How much time are you spending doing that? How can you make that more a part of your life? So it's really about asking them those questions. There is a time and a place sometimes and some clients come to me already in therapy. Sometimes they've been in therapy for 10 years and still don't feel like they've made a dent, in that side of things. Because there's different types of therapy, but talk therapy isn't effective for everybody. But the thing with dealing with trauma in particular is that as a health practitioner, a lot of people say, well, that's out of my scope of practice. And I would kind of disagree with that. Like, yes, a therapist is different than a coach, and you do have to be careful of those boundaries. But it's not a matter of if trauma is going to come into your work with clients, it's when. It's going to come up in resistance to change, self-sabotage, denial of things. And so, we really absolutely have to learn, how to work with clients on those areas. And I've also had clients who were traumatized by going to therapy and they never want to go back. Or maybe they don't feel that they can afford that extra expense because they can be super pricey too. Or for whatever reason, they can't or don't want to go down that route. So I wish I totally had step one, here's what we do. Step two, here's what we do. But again, it's totally dependent on the person. And again, it's, healing this side of things is also not a protocol. So it's really just about, knowing your stuff, having the knowledge and know-how, to try to work with clients in this manner. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an answer to your question.
I think there's again a lot of wisdom in what you said there, Sarah, and that makes a lot of sense. And I again couldn't agree more with you mentioning that it's not a question of if trauma is going to come into your practice. It's really a question of when. And yeah, I work with patients suffering from complex chronic illnesses, so kind of the sickest of the sick folks, and it's yeah the exception to the rule, folks that don't seem to have a history of trauma, and then even and that's like big T trauma. There's of course the little T trauma, just going through complex chronic illness or various notable health issues. Like that's a traumatic experience in and of itself. So yeah, it's super
Sure.
important to be trauma aware, and then knowing how to help folks with that either through the right referrals or things you can work with them yourself, as you touched on. One thing that I would ask you to do, if you don't mind, because I've kind of had this later in my question list, but it's timely to ask it here. You've mentioned transformational coaching, several times. You've kind of, I think, given us a decent sense of the flavor of what that's about, to from a bird's eye view, anyways. Just you had I saw one of your posts about like functional medicine versus transformational medicine, and like if you wouldn't mind like just kind of riffing on that for a minute, like uh, how would you contrast and compare functional medicine versus transformational medicine, just so we hear it right from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Yeah, sure, sure. So, what I kind of refer to as the standard functional medicine approach, which is the running of the labs. Sometimes it's a lot of labs, sometimes it's not, it just depends. And then typically those practitioners are going to sit down, look at the labs, and here's all the supplements. And generally speaking, I tend to see a lot of supplements.
Mhm.
And when I say a lot, I mean, I'm probably even just talking like 10 or more. I try to keep things initially at least, five or under. And even then where can I find food-based, things or stuff, to utilize at least. Um, and then again, it's, a lot of functional medicine practitioners understand things like, toxins and the importance of sleep and nutrition and, even emotional stuff, but the biggest difference is, again, it's done in a more of a protocol way or like a prescriptive way of like, okay, you need to work on your nervous system. So, you should meditate 10 minutes a day or, stuff like that. So again, it's more of the telling of and providing like, here's what you should do to heal
Mm.
versus the transformational medicine, which is again typically using labs, but in a much more strategic way. Like unless it's truly going to make a difference and tell us something we don't already know, and it's going to, change the approach. Again, acknowledging the limitations that they do have, then fine. Like if I have a client who wants to run $1,000 worth of labs, great, let's do it. But again, doing it knowing they're not going to be the holy grail of things. And when I present that, most people don't want to spend the money. They're like, all right, let's just save it. And again, it's a less is more approach, with supplements, using them when strategic. Um, and then the transformational part is yes, still addressing the lifestyle, still addressing those other factors I mentioned. But again, the client is going to decide. They are going to decide where they want to start, how they want to start, what actions they want to do. It's having conversations with them. Again, asking strategic questions. What intuitively do you feel you need to heal? you know and getting their, what's going on with them. They're the experts of their lives and bodies. And even when it comes to nutrition, it might be like, okay, I have some ideas for you, but I want to hear from you. What do you feel needs to change? And then if I present, my ideas and options, how does that sound to you? Do you want to start? Do you want to go all in? Do you want to just start with one step? What does that step look like? So again, you're just the facilitator. They are the ones that have to, be a big part of what actions they're going to take, what that action specifically looks like, all of that. So that to me is the big difference between the two.
Um, could you give us an example? I don't want to put you on the spot, so if nothing springs to mind,
Mhm.
it's okay. But
Sure.
could you, if something case springs to mind, like just maybe an example of someone where you were working with them, they were having, certain like persisting symptoms, that maybe they'd worked with other clinicians before, kind of went the more traditional, if you will, like functional medicine approach and just kind of had hit a plateau or didn't get a whole lot of traction with that. And then some of the like, say like it seemed like the biggest piece of the puzzle for them getting better was more of that, like, introspective, like kind of transformative work. Like, maybe there were some supplements in there, some dietary changes, but like it just seemed like, oh, like I had this aha, the client like had this aha moment, or they had this, change in a certain, habit or thing that they were doing. And like that just seemed to, really be what propelled them. I guess subtext is just to give folks a sense of like, what can the non-supplemental aspects of this, and the non-dietary aspect of this kind of approach like potentially do for some folks, if there's an example that might spring to mind.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much that's all my clients, I would say.
Well, that's easy then. That's easy.
Yeah, I mean, they all pretty much come to me having already invested a lot
Mm,
in the standard, functional approach.
yes.
And I get DMs like that all the time. Like I was put on so many supplements, or, some woman was like, they didn't even really do labs with her, but she was like, I was the perfect patient. I did everything they told me to do, and I'm still not well. And so again, that's the part in my mind. And I was like, okay, but they didn't give you the power. Like you gave them your power.
Okay.
So I think there's different aspects of that. But yeah, like, I have that happen all the time. You know, I honestly find that nutrition tends to be a huge missing link for most people, which we could go down a huge rabbit hole with that. But again, it's like, some people are like, oh, well, we just did, a food sensitivity test and I just removed those foods. Or, I ate a anti-inflammatory diet, which like if you Googled it, it's like anti-inflammatory. It's like that's not anti-inflammatory for you specifically. And so made like a complete overhaul with that. But yeah, like I have clients like who are just in terrible marriages and their relationship was like the number one draining factor. And it was like they were trying to do all these other physical things. Meanwhile, they're kind of in a toxic relationship. And so, it's not my job to tell them you are in a toxic relationship, but it's about, helping them to explore that relationship. And hey, on a scale of 0 to 10, how much do you think that this relationship is affecting your ability to heal? I have clients who have, you know, they're in, even their parents are, very controlling or not supportive, like things like that. So, again, it's just helping them to explore things that they maybe haven't really thought of or explored before. And like, how is this affecting you? And obviously there are things that aren't are always in our control, but we also can explore the things that are within our control because sometimes the only thing we have control of is how we respond to things, and so okay, how can you work on changing your response, and we go down that topic. So there's lots, I mean, that's transformation right there is having a lot of aha moments and making really huge shifts. Because, I think, if you were to talk about like the definition of wellness or the definition of health, again, a lot of people will start to think about just the physical things. But it's really about, changing how you show up in the world. You know, it's how you think, how you act, who you surround yourself with, what you eat, all of those things. And so we tend to look at health and healing from such a small, microscope instead of really taking a step back and looking at the larger, bigger picture. And so that I think is also a big difference. Like functional medicine in a standard way is more transactional. And like some people may find some relief with that, you know, but in my experience, when that happens, that relief tends to be short-lived because they have not like when you have someone telling you what to do, what happens when that person isn't there anymore? Like you have to learn to stand on your own 2 feet.
Hmm.
So that's why, transformational medicine is that it's doing the deeper work so that they can continue, with the things that they need to do to support themselves long after, you or I are not here anymore. And, so it's a whole different approach, but I find clients, are seeing much greater results from, this approach than they ever did with, the standard approach that I started using, when I first got into this business. But, you kind of also have to be honest with people. It's not easy,
Hmm.
and again, we live in a society where we're now programmed for quick, easy, painless, comfort, and that's what we seek. But that's also human nature. And so, we really, need to start talking, I feel like, with people about like these types of things so that, they don't waste years and tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on a standard functional approach that doesn't really help them. Because I see that a lot. Actually, my business partner, Jen, dealt with chronic illness for over 20 years and she spent $500,000 out of pocket and she
Wow.
was no better. She
Wow.
was no better. So she became her own best self healer, started, and she actually was able to, finally find answers. And now that's why we work to teach other practitioners all of the things, that we've learned in that process.
Yeah. That's an expensive life lesson, but glad that
Sure.
she's doing some good with the
Yeah.
aftermath of that. Wow, that's a high price tag to say the least.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, I know we don't have a ton of time left, Jen. Or sorry,
Hmm.
I have too many Jens in my life.
I
Sarah,
had
sorry. My resident's name is Jen, so sorry. Just talking to her earlier today. Both have a Jen in our lives. Just circling back to the HTMA, do you do repeat HTMAs or do you generally just do a initial one?
Yes, it is important because just like healing, mineral balancing is a long game.
Hmm.
It's not going to be a one and done process. So I do typically recommend, at least every 6 months. Some people can then work up to like every year
Hmm.
of, rechecking on things. And then, because it's kind of like peeling back layers of an onion, right? It's like you kind of got one thing kind of in check a little bit, and then, other things kind of pop to the surface. And I think with any healing journey, like no one's going to be able to do every single thing they need to do in like one time. Like I've been working on my own health for like 8 years, and I continue to like add things, learn things, evolve.
Hmm.
And, that's what the healing journey is. And that's why, the HTMA can be a great tool to use as that roadmap as you continue to work on, your healing.
Mhm. So with the HTMA, and I'm not sure if you already kind of alluded to this, but I'll just ask you straight up, directly. So kind of suggesting it's not really a linear process with the HTMA. Like you're not seeing like, everything, all this was high, all this was low, and then now like just it's just like evening out, and now like everything's just tickety boo. Like, is it kind of like a bit yo-yo-y depending on what's going on with the patient, at least or the client, like at least for the first, I don't know, depending on the case, like 1 to 3 years, and then it kind of starts to even out more? Or are you always seeing highs and lows, even when the client's like, "Oh, I'm doing great. I've been, I'm transformed. I'm really good. I'm just here for like maintenance follow up," and then, you're still seeing the levels yo-yoing, or do you eventually hit that like or like that? Um, do things eventually like come back like pretty much in balance when the patient slash client is in balance?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the person, right? It depends on their consistency with things. It depends on, how much they're working on themselves, what they're doing specifically. And, life is inherently stressful. Like we can't 100% get away from it, nor do we really want to, because it is helpful to us, in the right doses.
Hmm.
And so I think that there will always be times where, again, maybe we went through a particularly stressful time and our minerals are going to reflect that. So it's not really ever going to be, I think, a space where they're good and now they're just good,
Hmm.
right? And I've yet to see 100% perfect HTMA, nor do I ever expect to see. I think that's not realistic.
Hmm.
Um, the best HTMA test I ever saw was my own, but I've also been at this a lot longer than most people. But like we always want to take how the person is feeling into account, right? So that's number one. So we're not just, interpreting the lab. So yeah, like that's always my question to a client, hey, yeah, I feel a lot of positive changes. Okay, great. And with HTMA, I think with as almost anything, certain things can look worse before better, but that's the same with healing. Sometimes certain things can get worse before better. Just depends on the case specifically. But yes, I generally find healing as a whole is going to be up and down, just like minerals are. Like where certain things look better, then maybe it looks worse, but yet the person still continues to feel better. And that doesn't mean something wrong is happening. That's just kind of the healing process. Because healing too, when in a nutshell, it's stressful on the body. Like that's a lot of work for the body to go through, and stress, we kind of need that in order to help things heal. So you often can see that reflect on the HTMA. So that's why really learning how to implement it and interpret it properly is really key, while also being really skilled at kind of connecting the dots from that person that is in front of you that, you're looking at the test from.
Well, Sarah, I really appreciate you sharing all this wisdom with us today. I know our time's kind of winding down here. I did want to ask you about just, online offerings that you have, how folks can work with you. As you mentioned, you have training for clinicians as well. I know I do have clinicians that listen to the podcast as well, so I'd like to hear about all of that. Before we get into that, is there anything else that you wanted to share or anything else that was on your mind, today?
Think so. I mean, Jen and I are working really hard to try to change kind of the face of functional medicine a little bit, not being stuck in kind of the protocol land.
Hmm.
So we invite anyone out there who's, willing to step out of that zone, to join us. We think it's really important in kind of the wave of the future, because especially I think post-pandemic, like I've experienced this, I don't know if you have, but I feel like the stress and trauma of that alone, and just especially with the, can we say the term vaccine out there,
Hmm.
and what it has kind of done to people, that, you know, treating quote unquote things is becoming more challenging, doing it the old-fashioned functional way.
Yeah, it's been a lot harder
So yeah.
post pandemic for sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. Well, so if we'll maybe start with the clinician. So clinicians that might be listening, if they want to, learn, kind of have some mentorship from you folks, learn about your methods, like how can they go about doing that?
Yeah, so the website with all of our practitioner focused programs is wellnesscodeacademy.com.
Hmm.
And that's where we've housed our holistic HTMA Pro program. We also have a parasite cleansing mastery program, which is a holistic, more kind of detox,
Hmm.
parasite from, again, physical and psychological. We also have a post-viral wellness solutions course for kind of post-COVID issues. And we have a 1 year practitioner certification program. And we're kind of constantly adding. We've got actually another program in the works, Wired for Wellness, that we're planning on launching in the fall, which is more kind of nervous system geared specifically.
Cool.
So that's where you can find us for all of that
Hmm.
information. And then I work still one-on-one with clients on a limited basis at the organic dietitian. And so anyone who's looking to work with me one-on-one on their own health could check me out over there.
So just on Instagram.
On Instagram, yeah, that's also,
Yep.
you can find my website is the same name, but
The
yeah,
organic.
I spend
Okay.
more time.
Theorganicdietitian.com. Or
Yep.
yeah, okay,
Yep.
great. There's
And
so many suffixes nowadays, so I just wanted to make sure
yeah.
I can look it up. But I'm just typing this down so I can add it to the show notes. So for folks that are interested in reaching out or learning more, and yeah, I can definitely vouch for your Instagram channel. Like I just really enjoy your posts that I've seen come up, and I had a whole bunch of questions about like the cell danger response and long COVID and different things, but I know we only
Well,
only
I
only
mean,
some.
I got nothing else today. If you want to keep going, I'm fine. Otherwise, we can always do this again sometime.
I appreciate that. Yeah, just my kids are going to be home soon from school, so I've got to wrap up a couple of things.
Gotcha.
Thank you so much, though. I appreciate the time
Sure.
you spent already, and but yeah, maybe we can do a part two and talk about some of those fun
Sure.
topics because yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like we yeah just we're focusing on the transformational medicine and the HTMA. That was really valuable, and yeah, I'm really intrigued by the HTMA. I mean, I'm certainly familiar with that test, but I've not heard about it used in that respect. So I'm gonna have to add it to my dance card to learn from you folks about that because it's really
Oh yeah.
interesting.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah. I mean, I that's why we created the program,
yeah.
because everybody is just, okay, this is your oxidizer, here's the supplements, or here's the diet you should follow based on this oxidizer. I was like, how is that's not taking the person into account at all. That's still
Mm-hmm.
just treating the lab.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I've had countless people who say, man, I've been taking these supplements for like 5 years and I'm still stuck in these same HTMA patterns. Like, what gives?
Great.
And so it's like, we're starting to learn.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd love to have a follow-up chat at some point, Sarah. So I
Yeah.
appreciate the offer, and I will reach out. So, folks, please stay tuned for part two. Yeah, thanks for your time today, and it was really nice meeting you. And
Yeah.
yeah, I look forward to chatting with you again sometime.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. And folks, thanks for listening to this episode of the Overcoming Chronic Illness podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and please stay tuned for the next one.